Over time, so powerful and predominant has the GDP become that the New York Times has referred to it as, quote, a celebrity among statistics, a kind of giant calculator strutting about, adding up every bit of paid activity, end quote. I could continue. Unfortunately, there are a few problems with this kind of an approach. The GDP was never designed, as we know, to be a measure of societal progress. Even the father of the GDP, Nobel laureate Simon Kuznets, recognized that in his words, the welfare of a nation can scarcely be inferred from the measurement of a national income as defined by the GDP, end quote. As a measure of consumption, the GDP makes no distinction between economic activities that are good for our well-being and those that are harmful for our well-being. Spending on tobacco, crime, accidents, natural and human-made resources all propel the GDP upwards. Conversely, the value of unpaid housework, child, elder care, volunteer care, Medicare, time with our families and friends, basically are not included in the GDP because they take place outside, in large measure, the formal marketplace. Nor are subtractions made for activities that heat up our planet, pollute our air and our waterways, or destroy our farmlands, wetlands, and our old-growth forests. The notion of sustainability and stewardship, ensuring that precious resources are preserved for future generations, doesn't seem to even enter into, in fact, I will say doesn't even enter into the equation. I think the case against the dominance of the GDP and its cousin, the GNP, was perhaps put forward most eloquently by the late Senator Bobby Kennedy of the United States in a speech that he gave nearly a half a century ago. And Kennedy said this, and I love the quote, bear with me. Kennedy said the following, quote, "The gross national product includes air pollution and advertising for cigarettes and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and jails for the people who break them. GNP includes the destruction of the redwoods and the death of Lake Superior. And if GNP, he said, includes all of this, there is so much that it does not comprehend. It does not allow for the health of our families, the quality of our education, or the joy of their play. It is indifferent to the decency of our factories and the safety of our streets alike. It measures everything," Kennedy said, in short, "except that which makes life worthwhile," end quote. Over 50 years ago. I think this is an accurate and powerful assessment of what the GDP does and how it skewers what we're trying to do here at Waterloo. There is another expression that says if you only give a person a hammer, then everything starts to look a lot like a nail. It's equally true that if society's only tool for calculating spending and well-being starts and ends with a dollar sign, then it's kind of like the nail, and reform is needed. Let's look at a few real-world examples of how growth in GDP can provide a misleading impression of how well we're doing or not doing. In 1989, you'll remember the Exxon Valdez oil spill led to one of the single largest increases in the U.S. GDP. An increase, at least until the more recent BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico surpassed it many times over, although neither approached the $80 billion boost to GDP that resulted from Hurricane Katrina. It was the same here in Canada as a result of the ice storms in Quebec, the floods and droughts on the prairies, and believe me, I know something about the latter, forest fires and insect damage in BC, and the collapse of cod stocks in Atlantic Canada, and one could go on. And few would argue that war, earthquakes, tsunamis, nuclear accidents, oil spills, hurricanes, ice storms, floods, droughts, fires, and depletions of forests and fish stocks represent societal progress. Would anyone argue that they contribute to the quality of life of a country and its people? Would anyone say that the toll in human lives and destruction of communities and families are offset because the GDP's gone up. The simple fact is, we need a clear, coherent, and compelling complement to the dominance of economic issues in the GDP. We need a new and transformational approach to defining and measuring well-being and thereby strengthening Canada. Which brings me directly to the CIW. And as Hughes pointed out more than a decade ago, 50 of Canada's leading policy experts and advocates came together to discuss how to promote this new approach to justice and measurement. One participant posed this question, might have been Hugh. What if every Canadian heard, every time they heard about the GDP, TSX, or Dow, they also got quantitative data about a wide variety of other social and economic factors, the index of well-being. The idea was based on the astute observation that indicators are powerful. What we count matters. What we count helps shape the dialogue in Canada, on the factory floor, around the water cooler, in universities, in the media, and in the corridors of power. What we count influences the policy agendas and the decisions of governments. And as a legendary Canadian economist, John Kenneth Galbraith, put it, if you don't count it, it doesn't count. So it was from that first meeting and several years of follow-up consultations, expert research and design, and peer review that the CIW was born. The key was to deliver a product that was rooted in the Canadian experience and grounded in Canadian values. Values. To me, friends, values are an inseparable part of this whole program. Values are an inseparable part of what defines Canada, or for that matter, any nation. Values provide guideposts for how we can move forward, how we can orient ourselves during challenging times, how we can inspire our citizens, and how we can be confident that decisions that we make and the paths that we choose to follow reflect the vision of our citizens and society and are based on the values of our society. Values, they enable us to tackle challenges such as climate change, health and well-being, diversity and inclusion, the impacts of globalizing the world, and so forth. In short, values provide us with a sense of connectedness and stability that enables us to deal with the ever-changing world. And so the network's mission is to regularly and publicly report on the quality of life of Canadians, to encourage the policy shapers and government leaders to make decisions based on solid evidence rooted in the needs and the fundamental values of Canadians. We have begun to track 8 interconnected categories which have already been identified, and I will not repeat them here today. This morning, we released the last of the 8, a report tracking Canada's major environmental trends during the period of 1994 to 2009. The report's principal researcher and author, Alexis Morgan of the Pembina Institute, is here with us today. Is he here in the hall today? There he is. Please stand up. He is the author of this great report, and believe me, it is a very good report. And he delivered an on-campus lecture, I think, earlier today. I've been trying to explain the report, not nearly as well, Alexis, as you, to various media. And what did that report find? It found that while Canada isn't in crisis situation today, there are clear warning signs of potential threats to our environment and well-being. Greenhouse gases are soaring, increasing waste generation and energy use, declining stocks of large fish species, and shrinking water supplies in parts of the country, I can talk about that again, are offsetting gains in other areas. If we don't change course, this report shows, some of these trends could eventually result, not could, will, I will say, result in poorer health, a weaker economy, lower standard of living, and a diminished quality of life. Many of the trends are already having an impact on us. Increasing ground level ozone, for example, is contributing to respiratory disease in parts of the country, particularly in large traffic congested cities.